Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to the Academy of Advanced Thought. This discussion is going to be around the concepts of Stoicism and their reality in modern day life, and maybe even the concept of living in the moment. And I wanted to start by sharing a perspective that may instigate some of the conversation and lead to where we've got to today. So when I personally think of the top three learnings that have contributed most in my life, I realize they're all about the way that we think. And some of you watching this or listening to this, that won't come as any surprise, but we think around 70,000 thoughts per day, and 90% are the same as the day before. And it constructs our reality. So the first learning that I've ingested is that how we think determines how we are and everything that we experience. And or as the Buddha says, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts, and with our thoughts we make the world. And this is why the Academy of Advanced Thought is named as such, and it's why these discussions are important. And another learning is probably from Viktor Frankl, one of my favorite authors, and in Man's Search for Meaning is probably one of my favorite books I've ever read and had the biggest impact in my life. And he said that there's a gap between stimulus and response, and in that gap lies our growth and our freedom. So that's the second learning, I think, for me that I've had, is that we can choose our response rather than just react, or in other words, reenact our usual repeat patterns. And finally, I'd look to Seneca for the third lesson, I think, in my life, who said that no person has the power to have everything they want, but it is in their power not to want what they don't have, and to cheerfully put to good use what they do have. And this is how the Facebook group discussion started, and it's been an interesting spectrum of responses. My personal view is that we can separate what we can control from what we can't control, and we can be content with the things that aren't necessarily right or wrong or good or bad. They just are. And then we can choose how we interpret them. And if we look at perpetual change, for instance, the only thing we can predict, and today is the slowest pace change we'll ever experience, change just is. We don't need to fight it. We don't need to cling on to certainty and comfort. We can actually use change and uncertainty as a power. And this is why I don't really also like the term failure, unless it's something that hasn't been attempted. I think once it's been attempted, you're not failing, you're learning if you want to be. So let's open this up. Firstly, I guess, with the Seneca quote of no person has the power to have everything they want, but it is in their power not to want what they don't have, and to cheerfully put to good use what they do have. I'd like to start with Greg. What's your personal take of that?
So yeah, I think it was a really interesting one, which is how I got involved in the conversation on Facebook to start with, because it hit weirdly true. So no great coming to Stoicism, but read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations years ago, and still dip back into it. I find it great because it's just a kind of meandering ramble of things that he found useful. And the quote you posted really struck a chord, and especially I find it really important today because I see Stoicism coming back in like small groups, almost as a kind of rebuttal to what's going on. I see so much catastrophization of what happens to people, where, I mean, we have the term for, we have a term called microaggression, which is, I have to imagine Seneca would just, completely laugh out of the room of, it's so antithetical to what Stoicism is and tries to be. And yeah, I think it is incredibly important to, yeah, be aware of yourself and not take um the outside happenings that you cannot control as both hurtful and or dangerous. And then where it's come back up, where I see more quotes, is I don't know if he is the first to say it, but Thomas Sowell reposted or came out just recently, and I thought it was, in the same vein, is, we all have while we all have a duty to not offend, a greater duty these days is to not be offended. And I think that really speaks well to the base of Stoicism is, if you are offended by something, that speaks more to you than the person who said whatever offended you. And being aware of yourself and being aware of how those things make you feel and being able to stop that. And so, and this really goes to the quote you put, is what you have in you that is good, or what you have, it's not even physical things, it's not what's going in your life, it really is just what you have is how you treat the world, how you interpret ideas that are coming in. So so in the past few months I've gotten started reading a bunch more, and then you posted the quote and here we are.
Excellent. Thanks, Greg. That's awesome insight, and love that quote as well. You personally know that I follow that mindset very strongly of the fact that if one is offended, it is actually a representation of one's own character, not what was actually what was said. I've only ever seen being offended as a choice. If people actually choose to be offended, it's like, oh, that's interesting. You're choosing to be offended by that. That's what you find shocking. Got it. Okay, that's good. I guess that's okay for everyone, right? Everyone's happy. If you're offended and I'm not offended, then I guess that's okay too. Okay, cool. So I'm going to pass over to Jem. Thanks for joining, Jem. I haven't had you on one of these calls either. So Greg and Jem are both Academy newbies, but that's the only context I'd ever see either of you as newbies. Jem, what's your take when you hear the Seneca quote?
I just think if I take it back to sort of my background and being involved in the military, then I think we've looked at sort of looking at values and looking at ourselves and having a place to go or somewhere to achieve. And I think by being something, not putting yourself forward, but you're using the values and taking that and not being distracted by other things around you.
And have you found in your life that's been has it been a useful tool to survive and to thrive? Is the way of compartmentalizing something that's happening with your own personal feeling of self?
Well, I think if survival comes down to when you're in a heat of the battle or something is going on, if you can create a 1 meter square around you and just not worry about everything else that's going on, you want to be able to control your space, what's going on in your head and your thoughts, and you can react to certain things. So things can be happening over there, but you want to know what's happening in your space at this time, so you can make the right decision. Not necessarily the right decision, but you're making a decision that you're going forwards and you're taking that forwards. And you may have to look at yourself later and debrief that, because sometimes we'll make the wrong decision. But it's using what we have around us to understand how we move forward.
Very good. Thank you, Jem. I really appreciate it. Another thing as well, Jem, what's quite interesting is that every time that Richard's been mentioning you in a chat, I thought he was talking to me because my initials JEM. So Richard was just talking about Jem says this, Jem says that, Jem's available, and I was thinking about he was talking about me in a third person, which was a bit weird, felt a bit like a celebrity. But anyway, thank you very much for your input, Jem. Richard, over to you. When you hear the quote, and Jem, I'll allow you to put yourself on mute. Richard, when you hear the quote, how does that resonate with you? What happens in your head when you hear those type of things?
Yeah, that's a dark place to go. Well, I think, not to want what they don't have. It kind of assumes that you sort of know what you want. You've got to know what you want, and also that there are other things available. So, and if we go to my lovely friend in India, Sadhguru, he'll tell you that ignorance is literally bliss, almost. It's almost as if we didn't have these amazing brains in our heads and overthought, we'd all be quite happy fools, really, in the world. We'd all be perfectly happy with what we've got. And it probably that's your 1 meter, Jem, isn't it? That's your immediate area. You just think about what you're doing and you're fine. You don't, you're not thinking about something else because you just don't know it exists. So that's the sort of first thought. I think it's cheerful what you have got. I tend to encapsulate this as, I call it 24/7 mindfulness. So whatever you are doing, do it to the best of your ability, whether that's doing nothing and chilling out, or whether it's becoming a mega high performance person, in whether it's the military or a surfer or in tech or business or anything. So that's my sort of initial thoughts. But yeah, for me, it's all about, if we have too much information, too much knowledge, then it can distract us from the now, which is kind of, I suppose living in India, I picked up a few things, and that they would say there's no such thing as the past or the present. There's only now. So common sense would suggest just focus on that. But then it goes on to the thoughts of, well, that's all a bit random, isn't it? Surely,
Rich, can I ask you just a point of clarification on that? It's very interesting when you say that too much information or knowledge can distract. Is that a volumetric concept, or is it one of filtering? So in other words, is it correlated that more information and more knowledge? Let's start with information. Actually, more information could be more of a distraction, or is it the case that more information requires more filtering so that it's less of a distraction? So if we actually can put in place filters, we're actually information agnostic, if we'd need to be. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, totally. Yeah, because it's interesting because it's just this whole idea of search. So we search on Google. We put the question in. That question is limited by our knowledge and our thought processes. But actually, if you flip it around and say, well, there's an infinite amount of information and knowledge and intelligence, the computer or whatever it is will go and do a bit of discovery and tell you what's important, tell you what the issues are. But even then, it's still, I agree with you. And I remember listening to your talk about noise versus signal, because there's constant, there's all sorts of things going around, whether it's energy in the universe or telecommunication signals or stuff happening. And I find it as a coach that if people have latched on to a future and they defined what that looks like, and they've got the values and they've got a kind of set of rules, then that is the ultimate filter. Because does it make the boat go faster is my little catchphrase. It's like, of course, everything's coming at you, and there's a subconscious brain that is picking things up and you don't know it is. But I think, you're totally right. You have to decide what the filter is, and you have to own it and say, what is my little world, and what will I let get through?
Yeah, good stuff. And for anyone listening, Ben Hunt Davis, the Olympic rower who wrote the book "Will It Make the Boat Go Faster," his talk online. He always pretty much gives the same talk, so you can look it up online and you can see Ben's keynote. Bless him, and it's actually really cool. It's a testimony to extraordinary focus. Without distraction. It's like a brilliant book on filtering. Well mentioned, Richard. So Prashant, over to you. You and I have discussed so many topics in the world together, but so I kind of already personally know what your opinion may be on this, and vice versa. You'll probably know how I take this, but assuming that I don't, for the rest of the world, what's your view on this particular quote, and how do you apply that type of feeling into your life? And I'll take you off mute, or you can take yourself off mute. Prashant, go on, press that. There you go.
Right. Okay. Well, to begin with, I think we have to. There's a human aspect of our life, and a lot of philosophical ideas kind of exist in the ideal world, and then there's probably not going to be any perfect application. But the way I interpret this quote is sort of similar to, say, the Bhagavad Gita, for example, which has this philosophical notion of focusing on the action and not on the fruits of the action. So give your 100% to what's in front of you, focus on the effort, and don't think too much about how it's going to turn out in the end, because a lot of that is not in your hands. And I think that would be my take.
Yeah, very good. And so I'm now going to ask you another question, which leads into the next theme of this that I would like to go round the circle on. And that's, Prashant, from your perspective, where does hope live in our lives? Is there a role for hope and or aspiration? If one were to look at the actions rather than the fruit of those actions, are we to put aside a defined, intended, or rather required or best in class outcome, which could be called hope? Or should we actually look at hope as something being very, very subjective and not necessarily objective reality, and therefore not attached to hope to such an extent that we ride an emotional roller coaster of being inflated expectations, then being let down, inflated expectations being let down? Where does hope sit for you?
Well, that's an interesting question, because to an extent, hope can involve looking into the future at the fruit of what you're doing. So now that's the trick. That's the fine balance. And for someone like me, I'm looking for a publishing deal. I don't have one yet. So do I? It's where what I'm getting at. The sort of fine line between expectation and there can't. There is an element of aspiration in all of this, but I think you can probably make sort of hope the sort of spark of positive energy that drives you. The sort of conviction that what you're doing is the right thing, and that rather than thinking when I'm going to get this, or when you're, you can just sort of think, okay, what I'm doing is good, and focus, sort of channel all that good energy into the moment.
Yeah, I hear you. I think, and Greg, I'll be passing over to you in a second with this caveat, I think, or segue. My view is that hope runs a risk of time travel, and we could accidentally almost live in the future contexts by mistake, as it were.
Right.
And then almost always then be potentially let down, if not guaranteed. And so my version is I separate intent with hope. I separate the two. Right. Intent is something that's in the moment, looking forward, and hope is something in the forward, looking back. And I'm trying to avoid the latter and concentrate on the former. And so, Prashant, thank you for your input, and I'll come back to you in a second. Greg, from your perspective, where does hope sit? Is there a separation between hope and intention and aspiration? Is there a risk of time travel, and how do you apply these things?
So it's actually something I've really struggled with over the years, and so I find if we're framing hope that way, I find hope, like almost slightly dangerous. Hope in my mind, how I'm look at it now, is a kind of fuzzy, oh, wouldn't that be nice? A very nebulous. There's no plan. There's no strategy. There's no, there's no action to it. Where intent has action, hope is just the dream, the whatever. And I have found in like some Stoics have covered this before, but it's one thing I've really struggled with over the years is to not say something and to just do it. To talk about something you're about to accomplish or want to accomplish. I find it incredibly lessens the chance that I will actually get there. Because the second you get that, pat on the back, the good feeling, the hit from the idea and the almost realization of talking about it and kind of doing it, and that it really lessens the drive to just actually go out and get it done. And it leaves you feeling, like as you said a second ago, Jamek, is it leaves you feeling with the only true failure, which is not even doing it.
Yeah, I think we set ourselves up for that, because we get the dopamine. We could get the dopamine hit from having hope, and then then there is a lessened chance of actually executing due to the fact that we've already had the dopamine hit, and then we actually feel the lack of the lack of any joy, or rather our diminished return of not actually executing, and then turn that round as as a way of framing ourselves as failures. That cycle, nowadays we could call it self-sabotage. I think it's
Oh,
actually
yeah, negative feedback loop, whatever. Yeah.
exactly, you can call it whatever you want. At the end of the day, we're driving our identity and our view of ourselves based on a framework or prison that we've constructed ourselves. And this is what's so brilliant in Papatakis, his book of his learnings from being a student of Frankl, in the brilliant book called Prisoners of Our Thoughts. His entire thesis is constructed that his view of what Frankl was saying was that you can construct whatever prison you want. If you want your prison to be one of this roller coaster of maybe it can be, or rather, yes, I'm going to be a successful X, Y, and Z. You get the dopamine hit. You maybe even get some business cards printed. It never actually happens, and then you turn back around to yourself in the middle of the night and think that you're a failure. This is something that you constructed yourself. There's no third party inclusion in that. So, Jem, do you have a version of, or do you split hope from intent, or do you have, from your career perspective, has that type of time travel risk been a danger to what you've done?
Well, I think we hope is, as you say, it's that looking forward. It's a bit like a dream, but it's like if you have a goal without a plan, it's a dream. It's trying to bring the two together, and for me, it's like bringing that control, the intent, into the visualization of where you want to go. And yeah, it's like, we've got a 5-year plan, which is way over there. That's a hope where you want to be, but it's like, okay, that's a 5-year plan, what's a 3-year plan, what's a 1-year plan, what's you're going to do the next 6 months, what are you going to do in the next 3 months, what are you going to do in the next week, what are you going to do today that's going to take you a stage closer to reaching where you want to be. So it's putting it like that. If I look back to probably the most difficult task I've ever done, which was volunteering and going through Special Forces selection. The actual first phase of it is a selection phase of it. It was only 17 weeks long. Mm-hmm. Can't be that difficult, but every day was a challenge. And the hope was to finish.
Right.
Yeah, for me, it was to get to that stage, and I couldn't really visualize what that would be like. So I had to break that down into bite-sized chunks. And that was every day. So my task, the intent, was to finish a day. Just finish a day without putting my hand up and ringing the bell or asking to the DS that I wanted to come off. And your mind is telling you on a lot of occasions you want to quit. Right. Or your body's telling you, and it's a mind that's just keeping you going. Why am I keeping going? Because I want to get to the end of the day. It was just, and I have a little calendar on the back of my locker, and I would tick off a day. And I'd achieved something. It was just completing a day, but I'd achieved that one day, which was taking me a stage closer to getting where I want to get to. And it's like, an aircraft takes off, the pilot's in charge, but the wind hits it, he has to alter course and come back on course. So it's bringing that all together to make sure that we have intent, but we still have a direction, we know where we want to go. And to me, that's the hope. And it's whenever we're doing something that's challenging, it's getting the emotional rocket fuel that's inside us to take us, to push us, because we will fall down. Why do we get back up? Because we've got this dream, we've got somewhere where we want to go. I think that's my take on hope and intent, trying to bring that together.
Yeah, thanks, Jem. Well articulated. And Richard, how does that sit with you? And you can riff off what Jem said, or from what Greg or Prashant and I have said. What's your view?
Yeah, no, brilliant. Yeah, I totally get what Jem was saying there. I think you've only got that day or that hour to focus on, and you just got to get to the next stage. It's kind of like chunking it. The Chinese would say, a journey of 1,000 steps, but 1,000 miles begins with a step. So for me, hope. I kind of, my thought might have changed just listening to this discussion. Really, I suddenly thought, well, I get that point about the dopamine hit. You're thinking about the future. Your brain, I can't remember the term for it, but the brain basically thinks it's already happened and says, hey, that was great, thanks very much, next, we'll move on. So I'm kind of thinking maybe hope makes the now more bearable. Maybe that's the purpose of it. because there isn't a future, there isn't a past, right? So it's just a way of making now better. And I call it you latch on, it's like a grappling hook. You throw the grappling hook on, you pull it tight, right? Okay. And then you just pull yourself in gradually. So it's maybe hope is a way of connecting, feel the future. I call it feel the future. So yes, you've got an amazing future ahead of you, and it's going to be like Jem 17 weeks to get into special forces, but there is only today. So you've just got to feel that now, and that's the energy you get. So some people might call that the law of attraction. I would say, I'm into the law of propulsion. If you want something, go and get it. It's more propulsion. It's not waiting around for it. So really the law of attraction is really the law of awareness. Once you suddenly become aware of stuff now, it was already there. You just didn't notice it. And so now you're kind of using it. It's not magic or mythology or, hey man, the universe is talking to me. It was already there. Yeah. You're just pulling it into the now.
By actually doing something about it, which is the law of propulsion. Yes, I concur with that.
And intent, yes, it goes back to your thing about intent. And I think, for me, if I was talking to my business clients, I'd say hope, hold on, profit expected. It's we love coming up with acronyms, but
nice. Very good. I like it, Richard, and thank you, Rich. I'm going to pass over to Prashant. In your perspective, Prashant, is there any drawbacks of hope if we look at it as a grappling hook to the future that we can actually draw towards us or move toward? Are there any counterproductive parts?
Well, I mean, there's the obvious aspect of delusion to start with. It can probably drown you in delusion, and then there's also the possibility that you sort of get transported into the future. You do that bit of time travel, and then you become aware of all the obstacles in your path, which might adversely affect your actions in the present. And then, and we like to think in terms of probability. That's one more, I don't know. We like to rely on probability and improbability, and these things can give us an unrealistic picture, both in a positive and negative way, about things.
Quite well said. Good. Okay. So Prashant, whilst I'm with you now, I would like to see your perspective on this actually. So I wanted to raise the next point. We've covered. We started with the quote. We then went on to hope, and now I'd like to talk about anger. And one of my greatest learnings was my ex-business partner completely dismantling my career with extreme hostility. And what has really contributed to my success is that hostility was actually, and the actions has been a giant springboard to come back even stronger with more vibrant curiosity and eagerness to learn. And what I certainly didn't do was try and get my own back or get even, all this eye for an eye stuff. It's a very poor interpretation of the Old Testament. I think anger personally is something to avoid, along with comparison, which is just as bad. And instead, as Marcus Aurelius said, the best revenge is to not be like your enemy. And I think the biggest danger with hate is that one becomes what they hate. And another semi-stoic, Shannon Adler, said that if you spend your time hoping someone will suffer the consequences for what they did to your heart, then you're allowing them to hurt you a second time in your mind. So where do you see anger placed in your life, Prashant?
At this point, I don't know. I don't remember the last time I was really angry. I have been irritated. I think that happens every now and then. But you sort of, but I just avoid the news. So that's a lot of that's also going out. But you just, I mean, it's definitely an unhelpful thing. You're getting angry about something that's out there that's got nothing to do with you immediately. It's also, I think, I mean, anger falls in, it has its origins in fear, and the fear of not being able to control. And that's inherently an ugly starting point.
Yes. In fact, it's also the counter to probably the central tenet of Stoicism, which is that there's things you can control and things you can't. And the trick is such a simple thing to say, but personally speaking, that's something that I have to remind myself, probably starting to do it more semi-consciously now or unconsciously, but it's a daily, it's an almost minute by minute situation that that I'm going to be in control of. I'm okay with the things that I can control, i.e. my thoughts and my actions. And obviously there's that whole myriad question over free will, which my neuroeconomics diploma was certainly a part of. Yes, Prashant, you were going to say something.
That said, I would like to add that I think it's important not to repress your anger, because I think you probably need to be aware of it as well. If something is rumbling inside you, you probably should be open to yourself about it and not try and repress it, because it's going to come out some point anyway, and it's going to be, you know, it's going to be weird. If you allow things to build inside you, they never come out, you know, they don't go away by themselves. I think you need to be aware of it and to deal with it.
Very good. Okay, in which case, Greg, over to you. Where does anger play a role, if at all, in your life?
I think definitely paying attention to it. I actually have I think it's actually really important, and I don't think it's negative, but I think you have to break it down between, I think there is, you know, you mentioned a couple of them, but you mentioned anger, you mentioned hatred, you mentioned revenge, and I think there's also like rage. And you know, so rage is just completely, absolutely non-productive. Hatred, I think, also falls in that. Hatred is then a reaction to emotion that is non-helpful. It's non-productive. It's you know, building. But I think there is a way of looking at anger, and this kind of to Prashant's point, acknowledge it, but then acknowledge it and harness it. And I know that Stoicism would say more ignore it, like leave the emotion behind and use. But I've often found, especially in creative work, that there's an old quote, passion is anger is the better part of passion. Right. And so that as fuel, that as, you know, realizing that there's something in there that inflames you, right, and really drives. But then to the end of the Stoicism is using that and realizing it, don't react to it, and then channel it. Yeah. And so, and I think that's been really important in my life in, you know, the past couple of years, where I definitely, as a younger man, was much more of a reactive vehicle for it. But now realizing that it's going to happen, it's going to be there, and then acknowledging it and using it has become like nearly second nature. And I've gotten quite a bit better at moving through those steps at like also a much quicker pace.
Yeah, good stuff. Well said. And Jem, what's your take on this?
I totally agree with Greg there. And if I can't remember the last time I was angry, but it's always when something's happened that's not been in your control, or you know, you've lost control and you can't change it, and you didn't expect it. But as Greg said, if you can learn and deal with it quickly, understand it, and that is very difficult to do, but you know, and then you channel it into a constructive way and not hold it, not, you know, because that's just that digging in emotion that you carry around with you, and you've got to let that go. So it's understanding it and get rid of it as quickly as possible. But you know, I think, you know, with a lot of part of the training I went through, you know, you have, you know, sort of controlled aggression, which is completely different. You know, but anger is something that happens very quickly. It's something you didn't see coming, and you haven't been able to control it. So if you can then quickly understand it and then channel it into a, you know, a positive way, I think that, you know, it needs to be got out of your system as quickly as possible.
Got it. Good stuff. And Richard, what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, just picking up on what Jem said, I got to the heady heights of the Territorial Army and the Parachute Regiment, so a weekend amateur. But yeah, the Parachute Regiment, this thing called milling, when you do selection, it's called milling. So literally two people put you in the ring and you've got to sort of fight with each other. And the philosophy was, if you can't beat up your best mate, then you can't kill the enemy. So it's kind of that controlled aggression thing. But I think back, I always think when people say, oh, when you get angry, you've lost it, you've lost the plot. But if somebody is trying to mug you or hold a knife to you or threaten you or break your values or something, then you will get angry because you don't want them to mug you or they'll want to kill you or something. So yeah, it's an interesting one for me. It's like everyone says, oh no, your reaction, how you react is under your control. But I sometimes have a problem with that because yes it is, but sometimes you do need to take some action, but it may not come from anger. I think the biggest moments in my life where I've reacted quite forcefully about things and possibly dangerous, dealing with Eastern European drug gangs and people like that trying to infiltrate our supply chains. It was a reaction to, well, hang on a minute, I work for a global pharmaceutical company. You're trying to ruin our reputation by, counterfeiting and stealing our drugs and causing harm. That's against my values. And that kind of made me, was that anger? No, it made me sort of rise up. It gave me some energy to tackle it and deal with it. But yeah, I think times when I've been angry, I've probably lost the plot a few times, and it hasn't worked out for me. It's made me look stupid, and so I've realised that really we're not triggered. I believe, I'm a big fan of Lisa Feldman Barrett, who says we're not triggered. We are. It's really a very fast prediction that's going on. It's not a triggering; it's a fast prediction. And if you can understand the code that leads to that prediction, then you have total control.
Yeah. Okay. In which case, let me then raise our final topic for this short chat, because it seems to come on from moving from it seems to be under the banner of what we can control and we can't control, what we have and what we don't have. We've then looked at hope, but then we looked at anger, and there's a lot of this that seems to be about self-talk. And so I'd like to talk about this self-talk concept of what we tell ourselves. And for instance, when I drift into a daydream of thought patterns that are my inner self-talk about things that are bad or make me mad, this is all in all contexts. It can be personal, professional, whatever. I notice that when I'm caught up in self-talk, I remind myself that this is actually just self-talk, and it's only real if I allow it to dictate my reality. So how much of this self-talk is going to be real for me today? Is it going to be all of it? Is this self-talk now going to be the way that I carry myself today? And then, looking at it from an epigenetics point of view, regardless of your feeling of Dr. Joe Dispenza or anyone else in this field, there is quite a level of scientific research into how we think determines how our body actually organizes itself. And so I choose what self-talk to listen to, largely due to two KPIs, which is down to feeling of peace and a feeling of fulfillment. And then I design my very, very selfishly, or rather self-fully, design my self-talk to match exactly that level of peacefulness and fulfillment. And I'm actually getting quite militant about how much I'll allow anything that isn't peaceful or fulfilling to be inside self-talk. So Greg, actually, no, sorry, to Prashant, then I'll go to you, Greg. Prashant, from the perspective of self-talk, how do you manage, assuming that you actually do have an element of self-talk in your life, and I'm being respectful to the fact that we may all have different versions of how we think reality is constructed. Mine is self-evident, literally. Prashant, how do you position self-talk in your life?
Self-talk. Actually, I try not to make things too self-conscious. I like things to be organic and things to flow from a subconscious level rather than from a conscious level. A lot of the thoughts that I'm aware of in my mind, I would say about 75% of them are literary, as in narratives, that I'm trying to write or I'm thinking of, or there's also a bit of analytical stuff always happening. If I come across something, I'll put it through all the filters up there, or find paradoxes within and all that sort of thing. But in terms of the self-talk, I think a lot of I'm kind of at a stage in my life where a lot of it isn't self-conscious. It's it's organic. I identify something I need to achieve and sort of work towards it, and I pick things up along the way, and these sort of operate in subconscious sort of, and move towards it subconsciously. So
that's good to know. And so thank you, Prashant. I'll come back to you at the end for a final wrap up. Greg, and I must admit, I kind of inserted self-talk in here in my head from the movement from hope to anger, but it may sit differently with you. Where do you place self-talk in your life, Greg?
Oh, I use it a ton. It was the weirdest thing when I read I can't remember what the percentage split is, but they say there's something like 20% of people do not have an inner monologue, like they don't talk to themselves, which oh my God, I can't believe I was like 40 years old when I first learned that. And it's still, I cannot imagine, I can't imagine how anything works without it. There's just a constant running dialogue. And so, yeah, I find it's been something to absolutely train. So to the kind of the point you were making of what you let in and kind of stuff, I don't think mine's that formal, but it is a stopping myself when when I'm taking a wrong turn, when, letting myself become excessively negative. It is 100% a choice. It, as bad as things get, I can get to a point where, it doesn't bother me. The great Mel Blanc's quote, tragedies when I get a paper cut, comedies when I fall in an open sewer and die. And I've had some like funny things where people will see me get annoyed at small things, and I get over them pretty fast now, and that, but then something hugely will go wrong on a big trip, and I'll walk it off fine. And I weirdly have an easier time getting over big stuff than little stuff. And yeah, I've been trying to figure out why that is so true.
Excellent. Very well said. Jem, over to you. What's your take on this?
A bit like Parachute, I think I don't spend time talking to myself, but what I will do, and I over years I've developed a way of just making sure I stay in a positive state. I know when things are going to go slightly, or when things do go wrong, I know how to change that negativity that affects me, so I can change it to do things positive. I mean, I'll always start with a morning routine. I have to do exercise in the morning. Unfortunately, quite a few years ago, I did break my back, so in a parachute accident. So I can't run like I used to, but walking is good for me. Doing yoga is great for me. It's just clearing that mind and making sure that I've got rid of all those negative distractions. You mentioned earlier, the news. Limit what you hear. So it's just controlling my day to make sure that I can do. Tomorrow morning, I'm getting up at 5 o'clock and I'm going up onto the Pennines and climbing 1,000-meter mountain. So that's the way that I get the positive energy into me, that I just know how to deal with myself to keep myself in a good state.
Brilliant. And interestingly, you seem to be echoing a great quote by Epictetus in what you've just said, where he said that wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. And I think there's a beauty and simplicity there. And I hear that and do enjoy the Pennines. Richard, over to you for a final wrap up. I'd like to give you a quote to inspire a closing statement from your perspective. I'm going to put you all on the spot with this same quote. And this quote is from, if I'm not mistaken, actually it is Epictetus. Yes, it is Epictetus, I think, who said that don't explain your philosophy, embody it. So in closing, what would you say is your final reflection, embodying your philosophy rather than just explaining it. What's your view of this conversation and Stoicism and momentary presentness and mindfulness? How do you view everything in summary, to wrap up?
Yeah, so that is the big word of 2020 for me, embodiment. So I last year I had a mindfulness coach, and by week 4, she said to me, "Richard, you're far too much in your head." I said, "This is mindfulness course, right?" She said, No, it's like you need to get into the body, you need to embody it. And we started going on about the mind-body connection, which is, we're never going to end up like a little brain in a jar of bubbling liquid in a laboratory. We need the body, the brain needs the body, and vice versa. So yeah, embodiment is what it's all about, I think, because the brain, if you take action, either get fit or eat well, the brain notices that, and it, as you say, corresponds. And there is some evidence that DNA changes as well. But big summary for me is I believe that our brain is really, really dumb, but it's also very, very powerful, and it isn't born knowing anything. It's a guidance system. It's not a random compass connected to the universe, man. It's you put stuff in it, right? And stuff goes in it subconsciously, and you put stuff in it consciously. So, when people say nothing works out the way I thought, I say it worked out exactly as you thought. You just weren't aware of your thoughts and where that knowledge came from. So you'd already programmed your, as Prashant says, moving to, he moves towards it subconsciously. Well, he's already programmed that subconscious to do stuff, whether he knows it, whether we know it or not. So I believe, again, going back to the idea of total control, that we can, whether it's neuroplasticity or whatever, we've got a guidance system. We've just got to tell it the coordinates of where we want it to go. And that's where I took, like, if I elevate my version of what I do, it's like I help people experience time differently, because I believe if they can get their mind and their body in like perpetual coherence, as we say, they'll get somewhere a lot quicker.
Yeah, quite right. And I love that point in terms of the, it didn't happen as I thought. I think it was Henry Ford who said that whether you think you can or you can't, either way, you're right. I love that quote.
Yeah.
So Prashant, over to you in closing. What's your final statement of the day?
I think you have to think of the larger purpose of existence, which is to achieve a certain harmony within yourself, to make sure your thoughts, your words, and your actions are sort of exist in harmony with each other. I think that's to get that sort of consistency. But I think that, and this is one of the reasons I gravitate more towards literature than I do towards philosophy, because literature brings out the murkiness. It does the same thing that philosophy does, but brings out the murkiness and the contradictions and paradoxes, whereas philosophy sort of gets into the ideal world a little bit at times. So, but I love philosophy as well, but there's often our humanity can be a bit of an obstacle in, and that's really part of the journey. And to an extent, this is what makes the journey much more interesting, much more pleasurable. And, I'll sort of sum it up with an Oscar Wilde quote. I said, "The truth is never pure and rarely simple. If it were either, modern life would be extremely tedious and modern literature a complete impossibility." So
what a quote. Love that quote. It's a great quote. Thank you, Prashant. Appreciated.
Sure.
Greg, over to you in closing, and then Jem, I'll come to you finally. Greg, what's your view? What's your take?
To echo both Richard and Prashant of the philosophy being an ideal that can't live in the world. I think it's it's important to always hold that as well. As you look back at Stoicism and look for an ideal to strive for, to just let yourself fail, and then to your point, there is no failure in trying. There is simply failure in not doing. And I just find that really, really important. And, not even comparing yourself to somebody else, but sometimes not even comparing yourself to yourself. I mean, some days I'm not equal to the better man I was that morning. I think that's a really important one to some people. It's helpful for some people to hear.
Quite right. And I think that's okay too. Good man. And Jem, over to you in closing.
Yeah, I totally agree with, you know, sort of keeping harmony, keeping ourselves in balance, but pushing ourselves. Life is not a dress rehearsal. We need to just step out of our comfort zone to move forward and to have little challenges. It doesn't have to be a big challenge like, you know, what I'm doing tomorrow, but, you know, just a step just keeps us going. It keeps us, you know, together. So I think that's really important, that we just push ourselves and not become dormant.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jem. Well, thank you, everyone. In fact, as Seneca said, I think in closing, I may as well end with a Seneca quote because I started with one, that life is very short and anxious for those who forget the past, neglect the present, and fear the future. And I'm very glad that in this moment we've been able to exchange thoughts and feelings. And for anyone who is watching this who would like to be part of a future discussion, please do go to Academy of Advanced Thought. You can join the Facebook group through there as well, and view other discussions. So Greg, Jem, Richard, and Prashant, I really appreciate this opportunity to share thoughts and feelings with you. It's been a great way. For me, it's the start of a morning. It's 7 in the morning. I know for some of you it's late in the evening, so I'll leave you to the rest of your evening. And thank you for those who are watching and listening and learning. Remember that the Academy of Advanced Thought is not a promotional platform to try and convince anyone of anything. I genuinely created it to as a mission with a small m, to give people an opportunity to retain the sovereignty of their own thoughts and their own intellect in a time when it would appear that most answers are available by double clicking something, or outsourcing any form of curiosity to some kind of engine that's selling advertising. The Academy of Advanced Thought is to try and bring back without too much hyperbole, hopefully, bring back the old-fashioned form of discourse, which so much human innovation came from originally. Where people actually just spoke about stuff without needing to have some form of proper structure to the thought patterns. It's purely discussions and see what comes from it. So if anyone who's watching this, regardless of how far in the future, it's recorded on in April 2021, maybe at some point this becomes more meaningful or less meaningful at that particular time. I suspect there is somewhat of a movement toward more of a consideration about how we think. And I think that's because we are, as a race, potentially devolving ourselves to times when we're actually, we're thinking less and less and less. So maybe we're becoming more aware of the requirement to think. And I'm glad that this conversation was one of those manifestations. So thank you, everyone. And this will be published soon. I really appreciate you joining, and I shall see you next time on the Academy of Advanced Thought.
Thank you.